Okay, hello everyone. Hello Piotr, thank you for introducing me. I've known Piotr since Zagreb EUDC when I lost to him twice. We're going to talk today about prep time. I want to talk generally about the philosophy behind prep. I want to talk about specific time divisions that I'm going to offer you for how to divide your top half and bottom half preps. And I'm going to walk you through each of the steps that we do in prep and talk about tips and tricks we can do during that step. We're also going to do an exercise or a couple of exercises using motions that you have recently seen and potentially struggled with, and talk about how we can do them better. I do invite everyone who feels comfortable to open your cameras. It makes it easier for me to adjust my pace or my material based on your based on how you're responding to what I say. If it sounds like you're getting bored, if it sounds like you're very interesting, I can change what I do. It's easier for me to tell when you have something to say and when you want to speak up, etc. And also, it'll just keep me more engaged and therefore more interesting. Cool. Starting then with a few principles behind prep and behind the importance of prep. The first principle is that in debates, Peter, are the webcams of other people also recorded? I'd imagine not. You can just like pin
I
me.
think
That's
because
fine.
I pinned you as a speaker, it should not be.
Cool.
I think it might switch when they themselves speak. I think that's the general rule of Zoom recordings.
That makes sense. That makes sense. There you have it then. Okay. So, first principle is that we have limited time in prep, or in a debate. Debate is a game about time. We have limited speech time, we have limited prep time, we have limited time to think and write during the debate. That means that if we can optimize the use of that time, we're going to get a much better product than someone else. A person might be an abstract twice as good a debater as we are, but if they're inefficient and they need 4 times as much time as we do in order to access that being twice as good as we are, they're just not going to in practice be able to beat us. So learning how to use this time efficiently is incredibly helpful. When we want to use time efficiently, especially a short 15 minutes that we know ahead of time we're going to be stressed in, it is very helpful to have habits and consistent heuristics for for how much time we should be allocated to different things and what are the different steps we need to do. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Every prep I do, I go through the steps I'm going to talk about here. In almost every prep I do, the time I allocate to each step falls within the threshold of what I allocate here. It makes it very easy to glance at my clock and by rote or by habit go, oh, we've spent too much time on this step. We now have to move on to the next step. Now, limited time, along with stress, also means that we tend to prioritize earlier steps above later steps to our own detriment. Much like when we're analyzing an argument, we might spend more time proving earlier burdens because we want to make sure that we do a good enough job on them, and we don't actually end up allocating enough time to analyze, either in our speech or in our notes, the most important burdens of an argument. Cool. That's the first principle. The second principle is that debate is often decided in prep. As in, becoming good at prep or being bad at prep just determines the course of your career for many people. There are extraordinaries to this rule, but oftentimes a person who's an extraordinary to this rule who manages to do well even when they don't prep well does especially bad in opening government because in later positions they might have the privilege of having many people to respond to and understand the debate through previous speakers, but when they have to be opening government, then the fact that they weren't able to prep well does ultimately decide the debate. Debates are decided in prep in multiple ways, though. It's also the ideas that we end up coming up with. It's the ideas we end up choosing. It's the way we end up choosing to analyze those ideas, which oftentimes matters much more than our actual word choice or time division in our own speech. If I just chose the wrong argument, or if I just misunderstood what the core burden of an argument is, or I misunderstood what are the conditions that the debate has to go down, or the conditions for how the debate transpires that are required in order for me to choose to run this argument, all of that is crucial to making sure that we have the right case. But debate also is decided in prep because of the confidence it gives us. When we leave a prep confident, we are locked in, we feel good, we sound confident, and we sound good. When we leave a prep stressed, we're not going to be listening, we're going to be talking with a panic. We're going to be more busy thinking about, oh my God, did I make a mistake? And did I end up choosing the right case? And I can't believe prep went so badly, rather than feeling fantastic. I chose the right case, now I should just lock in and analyze it. The ability to not stress about what happened previously in prep and the ability to feel confident about the direction you're currently going down in the debate, in your own notes and in your own choice of case direction, as well as the confidence that you predicted the debate correctly, that you're not surprised by the directions or arguments of other teams, is absolutely make or breaking in terms of your debate performance. The final principle I want to give is that behind prep time is that this is an ideal place to practice. When you want to practice your weighings, especially your positioning as a whip against three teams and how you're able to uh, put together an entire debate and its clashes. And you need to do a prep, you need to have a partner, you need to go through an entire debate in order to be able to position it. You can make versions of this that you can do at home. You can have a watch an online round with just your partner and summarize that. But you're going to need to spend an hour or an hour and a half in order for that exercise to be efficient. For a prep time exercise to be efficient, you only need 15 minutes. This is 15 minutes. You're not reliant on anyone or anything else. You can do it anywhere at any time with any person. It means that it's super easy to practice and get good at preps. It's easy to watch back a short 15-minute recording of your own prep and give yourself notes and comments and feedback on what you think that you did well and what you think you did wrong in this prep. In fact, you can even subdivide it further. You can do just 5 or just 10 minutes of a prep and see if in those 5 minutes you were able to complete the first step of prep properly, or if in 10 minutes you were able to complete the first 3 steps of prep properly. Because of these three principles, prep time division is, in my opinion, or prep strategy in general, is an incredibly important topic for us to practice. The generals, that's it for principles. The general steps that we're going to do in every debate are steps that we can reconstruct logically. And and there are two important goals for us to fulfill in our general steps. The first is to answer the principle of limited time. So, limited time means that if we're talking, if we're spending time where I'm passing information over to Piotr, then that is time that we are not spending each one of us thinking or writing. If Piotr then asks a question back and we have to clarify this, we are losing time as we're doing this. So, on the one hand, we want to take as much time to think on our own and to be efficient in our own analysis. On the other hand, the second metric we want to prioritize is a debate is a team game. We need to be synchronized. We need to know what arguments we are running, and we need to be coordinated on what the strategy is for those arguments so that we don't have two separate 7-minute speeches, but a cohesive 14-minute team line. This is also very useful to get an external perspective in terms of you are missing a burden here, you are making a logical leap there, you have a certain presumption here that's unfounded, or you have a blind spot there. These are all things that are much easier when we're communicating with someone else. As a result, the steps of prep should look as follows. We start by thinking alone. We think alone about the motion and come up with arguments. If you are Iron Manning, then this step comes at the expense of the second step. And this is a step that is super important to get good at because this is the step that you'll be able to recreate with any partner you do in any competition you do. If you are good at analyzing emotion on your own and coming up with the potential arguments within it, then fantastic, you're doing a good job. The second step is to share because this is a team game and you're not ironing, so you need to share with your partner, and then they need to share with you so that you know what they come up with and they know what you came up with. This is also the point where you can share, not just missing arguments that the other side didn't think about, but additional illustrations, mechs, or anything that you feel is crucial to the argument that you want to share so that you have the same understanding of what the argument is. The third step is to prioritize. When we prioritize, we think to ourselves, which of these is the best argument to run? If we are a closing team, then we have a long list of priorities. We want to have, 3 to 6 priorities because we don't know what our top half are going to do. So we want to have multiple different possible directions and we want to preemptively prioritize them. Now, this prioritization is very important because it helps us, A, understand which of these arguments is stronger than other arguments and why, meaning that we choose arguments better, and B, meaning that we explain better why this argument beats a different argument. The fourth step we do in prep is analysis. We have to prove our cases. We have to prove our arguments. We can analyze them together. We can analyze them alone. Depends on the position, depends on our personal needs. We're about now to get into the steps for, we're going to shortly go into how we do each of these steps in detail, but that was a brief overview of what our goals are in prep. Before I talk about the specific time divisions for top and bottom half, are there any questions so far? Yes, Rold.
So after silent thinking, me and my partner usually also take some time to think through so that we have the comparative straight, so that we actually understand what every word in the motion means. Is that something that's advisable to do, or basically should you already do that automatically? And so you shouldn't discuss it with each other.
So that is something that we do both in our thinking alone time and in our sharing and discussing time. Um, and more specifically, I do want to say it is if more effective to do this on our own than just to do it together. It is effective to do this in tandem and even before we come up with arguments rather than after. And and it's important for us to share to our partners when we think that an argument has a certain comparative, what that comparative is for that argument. I will say, I think that your question is also getting at sometimes we're confused and it takes us some time to process together. It is still going to be more efficient, typically, to think on your own. What is my understanding of the debate? And what are my questions? If I have any questions, to have a very succinct version of that question, to be very specific. Is this debate also about X or is it just about Y? Is it also about internal narratives or is it just about external narratives? Is this debate also about the future or is it just about the past and present? These are very concrete questions that are worth asking your partner, but we don't want to sort of muse about it together. We don't, because that's a place where you end up losing a lot of time, where you just sort of spend a few minutes going like, so what's this debate about? And what do we think about it? And do we think it's gov or opsided? And none of that is actually particularly helpful. Occasionally, if there's a question that your entire prep depends on, i.e., if there's a question that you can't start thinking alone about arguments and analyzing the motion without having that question answered, we can stop our partner before the beginning of prep. I can go something like, hold on a second, Saudi Arabia is still a monarchy, right? Because if I don't know that, then I'm not going to be able to do this debate. And if I do know that, then I am going to be able to approach the debate. And so sometimes just getting a yes or no answer to something from my partner can be super helpful at the beginning of prep. But we want to use this very sparingly. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Cool. Let's get into specific time divisions offered for top and bottom half, starting with top half. Top half need more of their time in prep to analyze, especially OG, but also OO. Closing half teams have the privilege of an entire top half worth of speeches to spend analyzing. As a result, they get to spend less time thinking, sharing, and prioritizing than closing half teams do. My suggestion is to take 2 to 4 minutes to think alone. If the debate has very clear cases, i.e., if there's something that you go, okay, this seems very strong and very accessible, or if the debate has at least some cases that are very low-hanging fruit. You go, okay, this debate actually is probably quite deep and there's a lot going on, but there's at least this thing that OG are probably expected to run. There's this very clear, very tangible impact that's very directly stemming from the wording of the motion and doesn't require many logical steps or creativity. It is good to come up with those and then say, okay, I'm ready. When you have 2 to 3 winning directions on your own, potentially winning directions, that's a good time to tell your partner, okay, I'm ready. I think I'm done. If the debate is quite complicated, if it's quite niche and nuanced, if you feel that any given argument will require many burdens in order to prove, and that there's nothing particularly low-hanging, or if you feel the debate is very wide and you could go in many different directions, and there isn't obviously a direction that OG ought to go down, then it's worth spending more time thinking alone. That's why I say generally 2 to 4 minutes for solo thought. The second step is sharing. We again spend about 2 to 3 minutes on sharing. If you come up with very different cases, you're going to need to spend more time sharing. If you come up with very complicated cases where you go, okay, here's the argument, let me explain it to you. So you see, presumably this thing changes, and then that leads to these two things, and then either one of those could potentially lead to. If it's a complicated case, if you can't summarize it very shortly, you're going to need more time to share it. Now, ideally, of course, we want to save time. So we don't want to share a case. If it's something is our fourth priority case and it's really complicated, we can just skip sharing it. We can just mention briefly that it exists. If you know if you go sometimes you can give an indication when you start sharing. You can go, okay, let's start sharing. I don't have much to share, and then your partner can know that they can take more time to share if they need to. If you can shave time on sharing, that's good. If you're able to make sharing just 1 minute, if you can go, look, I think there's really 3 clashes. There's this claim on this clash, this claim on this clash, this claim on that clash. Your partner goes, yep, I fully agree. I think each of those is weighable. I think we can weigh this clash by saying this, that clash by saying that. I go, yep, I agree. We can be finished in a minute. It is worthwhile to cut time on sharing. Sharing is, the type of process that a fully optimized human wouldn't have to do. We could just like transmit it to each other's brains. Our third step is prioritization. We take 2 to 3 minutes to prioritize. So prioritization, we want to prioritize based on how easy we think something is to prove. This is both in abstract and for us specifically. It's worth thinking about it in abstract, because in abstract also means that the judge is more open to buying it, and also means that our closing is more likely to run it if we don't run it. So even if it's something that we think we can only run at like a 50% level, but we think that this is overall the argument that's easiest to run in the debate, we should at least be trying to run it and at least run it to some degree. In our prioritization, we want to think about how much we can prove something, how much time it would take to prove something. Some arguments take 7 minutes to prove, some arguments take 3 minutes to prove. And we want to prioritize how big of an impact we think something has. Let's say my impact is a minority of the population, but not an insignificant minority, feel better about themselves. Not to a great extent, but to a measurable and persistent extent. How strong is this argument? The answer is it depends on the motion. In one debate, this could be the biggest impact in the whole debate. Panel, look, people here are talking to you about marginally more funding for museums, and they're talking about, some artists feeling like they get a voice. We don't really care about that. We think it affects few people and in a very intangible way, compared to our benefit, which is we make a meaningful, though small minority of the population feel meaningfully, though not extremely happier. In many art debates, if you can prove a tangible benefit to people's happiness, you're doing great. In a different debate, I might go, panel, this stupid team is talking to you about some people feel better when I'm telling you that innocent people are being thrown in prison. This is obviously a much less important benefit. So depending on the motion and the other arguments in play, then the strength of the impact changes. So when we think about how strong is this impact, we also should be keeping in mind, relative to this debate, is this a big or a small debate? Is this a soft or a hard debate? Are things we should be thinking. Finally, analysis. We take the rest of our time, 6 to 9 minutes, to analyze. I'll talk a lot more about analysis when we get into the the way we divide each step. Roald, yes.
Yeah, this may be a weird question, but could you explain what the benefit is, like in effectiveness or efficiency of prep, of taking so long to like think in silence?
Yes. How every so often, like how long does it take in prep until you on average have one idea, until you on average have 2 ideas, until you on average have 3 ideas? Answer.
Usually that takes around 5 minutes for us to generate like 2, 3 ideas.
Then that's probably the reason why. If it takes you 5 minutes to generate 2 or 3 ideas, and you split up for those 5 minutes, then you can come up with 2 or 3 ideas. Your partner can come up with 2 or 3 ideas. Together, you'll have 4 to 6 ideas. You might have one idea in overlap. That means that you have 3 to 5 ideas. Having 3 to 5 ideas is much better than having 2 to 3 ideas, because it just means that you have far more options to choose from. It means you can suddenly go, hold on, this argument, we can actually integrate it as an impact of that argument. And sure, we won't get the full extent of it, but we'll make it harder to extend there. And this argument, we should probably run in deputy, because otherwise that's very weighable for our closing. Or this argument, which we only came up with because we spent more time, is actually the best of argument, because it just preempts all of what opposition have to say. So it's a good thing that we took extra time to think of it. Oftentimes, I come up with the best argument that I have last, because once I come up with it, I go, okay, I'm done. I have a really good argument, I can continue. Spending less than 2 minutes on solo thinking, you just won't have understood the debate. You're talking before you've understood the debate on your own. Spending less than 4 minutes, perfectly understandable. You're on a time crunch, but you will miss some ideas. I want you to do the following exercise. I want you just as an illustration for yourself of this importance, Roald. I want you to take 5 motions, and I want you to do for each one of them a 3-minute solo silent prep. See how many arguments you come up with. Then I want you to reapproach all of those same motions and take 7 minutes to do it. This is 7 minutes would be like if I'm bottom half and if I'm CO and I'm taking an exorbitantly long amount of time to think, which some people do. Some people take 7 minutes to think, and they do it because then they can come up with 8 arguments. And when you come up with 8 arguments, suddenly you start being able to go, okay, these are most likely to be taken by top half. If they take 1 and 2, I want to run 3 and 4. If they take 2 and 3, I want to run 1 and 5. If they take 1, 2, and 3, I want to run 5, 6, and 7. Like having that if then, we'll get to that in a moment, is super helpful, and we can only generate that if we have many ideas. If you believe that debates only overall have 2 to 3 arguments, then I suggest a new way of conceptualizing arguments, which is even if an argument affects a similar actor or is on a similar clash, if I'm able to explain from a closing half team panel, this is distinct from my opening, and I'm able to prove it in a distinct way, then it can count as a distinct argument. At that point, you realize that there's actually, whenever you think there's 3 arguments in a debate, there's actually 10. Because actually, each one of those 3 arguments can be run, in most debates, this isn't an always true thing, can be run in different ways. And those different ways can stand independently. And suddenly you realize these few mechs can be grouped into one argument. These few incentives can be grouped into a different argument. Sometimes an argument might stand even without clearly analyzing its counterfactual, and a counterfactual might stand as an argument of its own even without proving the argument itself. And technically, both of those could be seen as 2 sides of the same argument, or they could be seen as different arguments. There's no objective definition for what an argument is, or what a case is. Different people just use these words in different ways. But it is very helpful, or it was very helpful for me at some point in my debating career, to do this more granular breakdown of what comprises an argument and what is required for something to be a standalone argument. And suddenly you realize that there's a lot of different things you can do in a debate. Another way of coming up with this is you can watch a top half and think of all the different possible ways to extend a CG on OG, all the different ways. And suddenly you'll come up and take as long as you need for this. And suddenly you'll see that there's many different ways. It is helpful to know and internalize that almost every debate actually has a lot of hidden depth, and that top-tier debaters or top-tier academics or anyone, if they just spent long enough, would be able to come up with them. That is why it is worth spending more time thinking alone. That is why it is worth taking more time to think independently of each other so that you come up with different directions.
Right,
Cool.
that's fair. Thank you.
Let's talk about bottom half time division. In bottom half, we need less time to analyze. That means we can take more time to think alone. That means we can come up with more cases. It's not just can, it's also must. Because if we only come up with 2 to 3 cases, our opening will have come up with the same 2 to 3 cases. And in the bubble room, they will run those 2 to 3 cases. There may be some room for deepers, but we'll need to have been creative and prep in our thought process about where is the depth in this argument that could be analyzed as a deeper. There could be room for brand new actors or brand new stakeholders, but we'll need to have thought about them in prep. If we take more time to think alone, it also means we need to take more time to share and more time to prioritize. So I suggest 3 to 5 minutes to think alone. You can even exceed this if you have to. 3 to 4 minutes to share. And then 3 to 5 minutes to prioritize. You'll notice that prioritization is the step that gained the most time as we moved from top half to bottom half. There's a reason for this. The top half prioritization happens in a vacuum. You just go, which arguments do I want to run best? The bottom half prioritization has to have an if-then structure to it. So we have to go, okay, if our opening choose to analyze X, then we choose Y. If our opening analyze Y, we choose Z. That means that we need not only to have an abstract prioritization of which arguments matter more than other arguments, we also need to have a prediction of what our opening is likely to run. This could be based on generally my vibes or on specific familiarity with this team. And then we need to have a prioritization in light of that prediction. For instance, my number one priority might be something that I'm 95% sure that my opening will run. As a result, I'm not going to analyze it at all. If my opening choose not to run it, I'll analyze it during the debate. I can come up with it in real. I can analyze it in real time because it's the low-hanging fruit. It's the easier case to run. My second and third cases might be cases that I really want to run, but I'm quite confident my opening will analyze at least one of them. So it is worth coming up with their burden, so I have a very good understanding of the cases, so I have a high confidence that I'm able to run them if needed to a winning degree, but I shouldn't already waste my time analyzing actual mechs, impacts, illustrations for those arguments, because at least one of them is going to get taken by my opening. This prioritization is important both for what we're going to analyze in our last step of analysis and for what we analyze during the first couple of speeches. Because we need to remember, member often doesn't have to listen to the entirety of PM and LO. They might if they're going to go down similar directions. But if I heard the PM's roadmap and I go, okay, PM is doing 1 and 2, so I'm dropping 1 and 2, so I'm doing 3 and 4, we can just lock in. And we save a lot of time when we don't have to listen because we've already done that prioritization. We don't have to listen, we don't have to think, we've already done that prioritization. Now, I still need to diversify my risks. DPM might run argument 3, so I shouldn't go full on into argument 3. I already thought about this in prep. I said OJ want to run 1 for sure, and 2 and 3 probably. So once I hear that PM is running 1 and 2, I'm going to start analyzing 3, 4, and 5 in my notes. I'm going to switch between them. Odds are I'm going to run 3. I really want to run 3. It's the best argument of the lot. I want to run it. I want to have it to a degree that's winnable. But I want to make sure that I also have 4 and 5 because I knew from spending a lot of time on prioritization in prep that there's a high chance DPM will take priority number 3. Amitai and I will often leave prep with 8 arguments. And then go strategy number 1 is, or priority number 1 is to run the first 3 arguments. Priority number 2 is to run the third, fourth, and fifth. Priority number 3 is to run 6 and 7. Priority number 4 is to run 8. It's a great way to leave prep. Finally, we analyze. In bottom half, the way we analyze is as follows. If there are arguments that we feel we want to run or we're likely to run, and we're unconfident on their burdens, the most important thing is to talk together about what the burdens for the arguments are. It's crucial to understand what the burdens for an argument are and to know that you both know the same burdens. That way it's going to be much easier for you to do rebuilding. It's going to be much easier for the whip to nudge the member and say, hey, look, they're analyzing an important burden right now. You should listen to them. This is similar to what we want to say. If the burdens are clear, and in many cases the burdens are clear, right? This thing matters, this thing changes because of the debate. There's a problematic problem, there's a solution that solves the problem, it has good outcomes. Many arguments are just easy to run with easy burdens. In that case, you can take this analysis time to stress test a few of your strategies. Let's say you have 5 arguments. You are worried that your opening will try and run the first 3. So let's say the whip spends a bit of time trying to think about whether they can actually weigh options 4 and 5. And the member spends some time thinking, can they find a deeper on arguments 2 and 3? And then your analysis time, so it's 2 to 5 minutes we're going to be spending analyzing in bottom half at the end of prep. It's 2 to 5 minutes where you're just going to go, listen, I don't think I'm able to prove this argument. Or listen, I can prove this argument, but I only have 1 mech for this important burden. Can you help me out? Can you think of any mechs? This analysis step is one where ideally we want to be analyzing alone to be more efficient, but it's fine to be both touching base and checking in, and also to be doing it together if we want to together, for instance, make sure that we're able to execute strat number 3. Before I get into how we do each step in more detail, are there any questions about the time division? Cool. Cool. Let's get into each step then, starting with thinking. This is super important. This is potentially what many of you came to the workshop for. I'm going to offer several steps, each of which is very helpful for analyzing emotion. In real time, doing all of these is going to be difficult for you if you're not accustomed to them. That means you should do drills for yourselves where you're going over and doing all of these things. You should learn both which of these strategies is most efficient for you to come up with cases. Second, in which types of motions do you need to employ these different strategies? Because I don't employ every one of these in every single debate. Third, you want to develop your experience doing these different steps. And fourth, you want to prove to yourself that they're indeed helpful. Cool. Step 1. Analyze and bold the words of the motion. Caps spend a long time thinking about the wording of a motion. Should it be X has done more harm than Y? Should it be regrets? Should it be prefers a world? If it prefers a world, you got to pay attention to that. You got to bold that. That means there has to be a point of divergence from our real world. Cap think about whether something should about the intensity of words used. Should it say would condemn, would ban, would platform? There's a different burden placed on you when Cap tell you this house opposes soft drugs, and this house would ban soft drugs, and this house would decriminalize soft drugs. There are different thresholds of proof required from each of those. So when I get ban, I bold the word ban, and I immediately know to myself, we got to talk about what is the criteria for banning and whether this thing reaches or does not reach that criteria. When we have examples in brackets, each of those examples is something that we can use to find a mech or an impact or a framing. Each of those is something that CAP believe is a specific illustration or product of this debate. And each of those is something that the judge will believe is far more inherent and integral to the debate than things that aren't explicitly written in the examples of the info side. So I go over them and bold them. We're gonna shortly do this as an exercise for Panama Worlds round 1, I believe. Yeah, let's do that. Second thing we do, after analyzing and bolding the words of the motion, we can think and write what does and doesn't change. In every debate, it is crucial to understand what does change. The things that everything that we want to claim, we have to prove it changes or stems from something that changes within the debate. If it does not stem within the debate, or if it does not change within the debate, it is presumably an irrelevant claim. 1 second, my screen is struggling. I just plugged it in. Cool. It's just flashing black. Oftentimes, it also helps to think of what does not change. Because if I can identify that, for instance, a certain incentive changes while a certain capacity does not change, or vice versa, a capacity changes while an incentive does not change, then I can utilize both of those facts together to prove some third claim that stems from both of those. Or I can use this as a refutation to another team. They talk about this changing, but know that this other thing doesn't change, and that's required in order for their argument to work. Note, sometimes it's not obvious whether things do or do not change. Sometimes it's up for debate whether something changes. Sometimes I write down something, okay, this doesn't change. Then I go, oh, wait a second. Maybe I could argue that it does change. Sometimes explicitly realizing what does and doesn't change. Okay, this changes. Wait a second. Maybe I could prove it doesn't actually change. This leans us, for instance, pushes us to think of countervailing incentives or countervailing narratives so that we can prove something doesn't change, even though it might seem like it does change. This is very helpful, very useful, because especially when we're trying to come up, for instance, with creative extensions. Amrita and I will often have different extensions in prep that are directly contradictory to each other. Yeah, only one of these can work. These two require totally different stances. One of these requires going, come on, guys, but obviously this doesn't change. And the other one requires going, no, actually though, think about it. This does change. Let's explain why. It is useful to have this in mind. Cool. Third, think about populations. Populations matter in 2 ways. First, there are stakeholders. Second, there are actors. Who can tell me the difference between a stakeholder and an actor?
Stakeholder doesn't necessarily do anything. Actors do.
So what are stakeholders? Is a grasshopper a stakeholder?
Sure, anyone can be a stakeholder as long as they're affected
Okay.
by the motion.
There we go. Thank you. As long as they're affected by the motion. So a stakeholder is affected by the motion, an act, in other words, they are impacted, and so we care. Almost every impact in a debate ends up affecting people. It is very hard to have an argument that does not have as its terminal point affecting a person. If I go, sure, no individual is influenced by this in any way, but we still believe that, immediately many people will raise a skeptical eyebrow towards this argument. This is because people typically have a pretty consequentialist view of morality. It is difficult, even if you are arguing a non-utilitarian view, it is difficult to argue a non-consequentialist view of why something matters. For instance, even when we're talking about a harm to a dead artist, oftentimes we'll focus on living artists and how they feel about what will happen after they die. It's hard to explain that we should care about the dead person in and of themselves, although obviously there are cases where this happens. So who are the stakeholders? Who are the people who are affected by the debate? Who are the actors, or who are the people whose behavior, whose incentives, or whose capacity leads to different outcomes? In an average education motion, who are the main stakeholders? In every education
Student,
motion,
teacher,
students, teachers, potentially. Now, which stakeholder usually wins in your education debate? Students or teachers?
students, more vulnerable group.
And what more vulnerable group? What else?
They're not grown people, less agency.
They're not what? Sorry.
They're not grown people. They have less agency. They're sort of at the
Cool.
mercy of the system.
There's also
Cool.
just
That's
a
pretty
fuck ton
similar to
of kids.
vulnerability. There's what? Sorry.
There's just a fuck ton of kids, and there's only very
There's a
few
fuck ton of
teachers.
kids. There he goes. There's a lot of them. They are vulnerable. They don't have a choice in the matter or autonomy, and they are our future, right? What happens to the kids affects all of our futures. They are going to be the future parents. They're going to be the future taxpayers. They're going to be the future citizens. If I want to win with teachers, I probably have to turn them from a stakeholder into an actor. The best reason why we should make schools comfortable for teachers and make teachers happy in schools is that we have good teacher retention, high teacher motivation, good teacher relaxation, which creates good teachers and therefore helps the main stakeholder in the debate. Now, in an average econ debate, are the executives actors or stakeholders? Executives of the company.
More actor than stakeholder?
More actor than stakeholder. Are shareholders actors or stakeholders?
The other way around?
So, depends how capitalistic you are. From a capitalist perspective, shareholders, what do you mean? They're the stakeholder in a company. If you're a bit more of a socialist, you're going to say no. We don't like impact, benefit, and harm is not felt at the point that venture capital firms have more or less money. Benefit and harm is felt when employees are paid more and are given vacation to spend time with their family. Benefits are felt when consumers pay less and get a higher quality product. So shareholders and consumers and employees and executives are all in such debates to some degree an actor and to some degree a stakeholder. So what's important to understand here? In every debate, we have actors who do things, in almost every debate, right? Because let's say I want to argue about how a certain narrative is going to be portrayed in the media. Then my claim is actor does thing, as in media does portrayal. And so analyzing how the actor does this thing is going to prove how the portrayal is done. Analyzing the media as an actor is going to be crucial to analyzing the portrayal itself, even if the media is not a stakeholder in this debate. In every debate, we have stakeholders who matter because that's how we prove that there is an impact. We have actors who matter because that's often a central way to prove that things change or things happen. And oftentimes these actors are stakeholders, which means that we can have an impact from one argument leading into an incentive or a way that the actors change their behavior in a different argument. It is always worth thinking about every debate, who are the populations, in particular, who is affected, who acts, and who is both affected and acts. Those are oftentimes populations that are most enjoyable to work with. You can do a lot with those populations. Finally, fourth trick I want to teach you is to flip the other side's arguments. Whenever I write, whenever I'm thinking through the first three things I mentioned, I'm thinking as though I'm both sides. I am not yet gov or op. It doesn't matter what position I've gotten on tab. I treat the solo thought process of prep always as though I'm a neutral side. I'm both sides. Because every argument that opposition has is important for me. If they have an argument that's really strong, I want to flip or mitigate it. If they have an argument on a certain clash, I want to win that clash or win on a clash that's more important. I want to if they have an argument that that is contingent on a certain burden, and I have a different argument that can disprove that burden, I want to run that argument. But this is more true for like the strategy element. In terms of just the coming up with arguments element, the important thing is that there are oftentimes clashes or questions that could fall to either side of the debate. Let me what example will I give? Let's give this example. No, actually, I want to give you that one as your motion for today. So I'm not doing that as an example. Forget an example. Flips work in two ways. First, we can flip whether something is good or bad or rad. Okay, government want to claim X happens and that's bad. Opposition can claim no, X happens, but that's actually good. That's the first way to flip. Second way to flip. We can say, we can flip X changes. They say X happens more on their side, but actually X happens less on their side. Here's why. Those are the two main ways we can flip. The third way, though, but thinking about the other side arguments doesn't just help in terms of flips. It also helps in terms of identifying. When I think of the other side's arguments, I can go, oh, wait, so in that case, they could talk about this stakeholder. Can I also talk about this stakeholder? Even if it's not flipping the argument, it's finding a different argument on the same stakeholder or on the same metric. So I can identify metrics or stakeholders that intuitively fall to their side of the debate, but could be made to fall to my side, even if it's not directly flipping the argument. Throughout all four of these steps, I write down my arguments. So the way it looks is I write down the motion on the info slide, and I write gov and op and gov, and under each one of them I have a bulleted list. As I bold the words of the motion, if any argument comes up, I immediately write it down. I finish bolding the words of the motion. I write down underneath the wording of the motion what changes, and under that, what doesn't change, and I start numbering things that change and things that don't change. Whenever I come up with an argument based on something that changes or something that doesn't change, I write it down under gov or op. Then I think of populations or stakeholders. I identify them. If I think of an argument, I immediately write it down for gov or op. And then I look over all of the arguments that I wrote for the other side, and I think, can I flip them, or can this lead to any arguments for my side? And I write them down. So by the end of my silent thinking in bottom half, I'll often have a motion wording that is bolded. I'll have what changes, 3 things, what doesn't change, 2 things. Then I'll have let's say I'm op, I'll have gov arguments. I'll have 1, 2, 3, 4 written for, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 written for gov. And then op arguments 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 written for op. That is how oftentimes my notes will look at the end of a prep, or sorry, at the end of the solo thinking, or at the end of the sharing portion of prep. That's it for thinking. Questions? Cool. Let's do an exercise. I'm going to give you a motion. I want everyone to use the... One second. Piotr, we have a full 25 minutes, right? Like, I need to finish by 15, not earlier than that. It's perfectly fine, right?
Yeah.
Cool. So, here is the motion that you are getting. Wait, sorry. This is pre-bolded. You need to unbold it. We're going to take now 3 or 4 minutes to think alone using the tools that I just gave you. And then we're going to talk about how we share, and I'm going to ask you to share your arguments.
I don't think it matters, but this is the exact motion we did in the last session.
Yeah.
That's on purpose.
Try to see if you can come up with better arguments than you
Fine.
did in the last session.
Oh, is that what you said already? My bad. My
No,
audio
I
cut
did
out
not.
for a second.
Sorry, I did not explicitly say that already. No.
Fine. Got it.
Okay, let's start with bolding. Who would like to tell me which words of the motion do you think should be bolded? Who can tell me what are all the words in the motion that if you change those words, the motion changes, or in the absence of those words, it is a meaningfully different motion, and the words in the or illustrations in the info slide that help you come up with concretizations. What would you bold or underline?
I mean, I'm currently looking at the word advocating because the fact that it's advocating makes me like look at this more of like a trade-off because if you're doing one thing, aka like actively saying no, we need to participate in these institutions, then this comes at a trade-off of you like criticizing these institutions at least to some extent. So the motion of just like, would it be nice if we did this? Would be different than we should do this at an expense of the other thing.
That's very true. You just chose the wrong word. The correct word is prioritize.
Okay, yeah, fair enough.
Maybe the motion type. The fact that it's an X should Y means that even arguments that don't necessarily help the social movements are in and can win the debate.
Correct. Now, for me, that's just X should Y is just too much to bold. It just doesn't bold nicely. But I might bold THBT. You can short THBT. And any THBT debate, not actor.
I was slightly struggling because I felt like I should basically bold everything except for words like rather than, dead, or verbs. So
You're not
Sorry.
wrong.
But shouldn't you actually bold rather than because it's a comparative? Because it's either or no?
So I would not bold the rather than. Like that's the
Okay.
part where I just because like the it's like prioritize. Like the reason I don't prioritize those words is it's to me it's like clear that debates are about trade-offs. Debates are about comparatives. Every debate is. I don't feel a personal need to bold the words of this or that. I do bold. I go through this and I go, okay, social movements. Let's bold that. Why? Because that's the actor, or the main actor before we subdivide it. 2, prioritize advocating for what? Members of their population. Let's bold that. To do what? To actively participate in, and what? And reform existing systems, rather than what? Challenging them externally. These are all important clauses. Knowing that this is about advocating for, so we can talk about the messaging. What does the messaging look like? What else does this messaging achieve? Actively participate in. What happens when you participate in? Reform. We attempt to reform. Alternative is challenging them externally. How does that look? How does that work? Who does this? The members of the population. When I bold each word, I understand, okay, this debate is about social movements, i.e. Black Lives Matter, doing what? Prioritize what over what? Prioritize in what? In their advocacy. So in their advocacy, what should they prioritize? Whether the members of their population, so the people that they represent in the social movement, should they do what? Should they either actively participate in and what? And reform existing systems, or should they externally challenge them? Now, almost every person that I would talk to would understand the sentence I just said better than what is currently written on the page because of those emphases. Yes, it is important to emphasize each one of those. Each one of those gives me an argument or a framing or an idea, each and every one of them. Cool. In my examples, I do Black Lives Matter, advocating for Black Americans to join the police force. And then we have environmentalists seeking positions within corporations. And we have queer movements advocating for integration within religions. So I might even write down to myself, if I'm still a little confused about what's going on, I'll write to myself explicitly. Black Arrow Police, Enviro Arrow Corp, Queer Arrow Religion. I use shorthand to keep it simpler for myself, but having this clear, they go into there. Okay, now I understand what this debate is about. This is a debate about whether Black people should join the police, environmentalists should seek to become decision makers in corporations, and queer folk should enter religions. When they do these things, given that they're also activists and they're doing it because of the advocacy, they should attempt reform from within, and the alternative is challenging from outside. I imagine this is already a better understanding of the debate than most of y'all had when you got this motion. But all I did, literally, was bold every independent clause of the sentence. Cool. Now let's talk about what changes and what doesn't change. Who would like to tell me a few things that they think change or don't change?
I think I wrote a few things down. It's not very detailed. But the three things which at least intuitively popped into my mind is that what changes is the amount of people willing to join. I think you can argue it on both sides, honestly, but I think that's one thing that definitely changes. And then kind of on the goals don't change, but then the means of achieving it change. So that's then kind of where the debate centers. These were the first things that popped into my mind.
Cool. I broke down that last thing you said into two. I said one thing that changes is cooperation. Sorry. Let's say three things change here, right? Number one is participation. How many people join? Number two is cooperation. So presumably, if we have more black police, then more black Americans would cooperate with police. Presumably, if we have more queer priests, more queer people would cooperate with religion. Like, this doesn't just affect the minority who join, this also affects the overall population who belong to these social movements. The third thing that changes is the extent of external challenge. So, how much do I have a challenge of these systems from outside them? Now, what doesn't change? Who can tell me? Now, when we talk about what changes and what doesn't change, it's okay to have some like overlap too, right? I can say the messaging changes. It does. The messaging of these social movements, when they advocate for this over that, changes. This messaging matters because that messaging also affects people who don't even belong to this community or to this group of people. Cool. What doesn't change?
People experience discrimination.
Yeah? Can you break that down? There's two separate things that don't change that lead people to experience discrimination.
So, what do you mean by that?
I can think of two main mechs that don't change through which people experience discrimination.
People will still not be exposed to these people of these groups.
I'm looking. So the way I would divide it is I would say, right, or let me re-ask the question. If you were to ask the average American why there is police violence in the United States, what are the two potential answers you would get?
Like, you can get a bit political.
Debate is very political.
Because, yeah, of course. Because the police force is racist, is institutionally racist.
So that's one of the two. So some people will say there is systemic or institutional discrimination in these systems. I can get up and say corporations will always have a profit incentive which does not align with a green incentive. I can say the American system was built to disenfranchise and impoverish Black Americans, so they are inherently going to do more crime and get policed more. The second thing I could say, though, is that there's bad apples within these systems. And this is another thing that doesn't change. Another thing that doesn't change is that some people within these systems will be very opposed to reform. And the second thing that changes is it's in some inherent ways these systems can't be reformed. Those are the two things that don't change here. Now, the last thing I want to ask, can someone give me a division of actors and stakeholders?
Actors are like those people that join either protests or the police, and I guess also colleagues then, right, on proposition side, colleagues of kind of the activists that would join corporations. Stakeholders is probably people from those communities more generally. I think that's the right. If you argue for like social change or community benefits, or like contact theory kind of thing, then basically all the stakeholders every time are the people in the neighborhood.
Cool. Let's break that down. Number one, the activists who would actively participate and do the extreme active thing described on both sides of the house. Number two, the silent majority of people within these groups. most most environmentalists neither try to challenge corporations externally nor try to actively participate in reforming them. Most environmentalists just they recycle and they take the bus. We have the leadership of these systems, the chiefs of police, the priestly hierarchy. I think they matter more than just the colleagues, because the colleagues don't necessarily, they matter a little bit as actors, but not too much. They matter a little bit as stakeholders, but not too much. So I'd focus instead on the leadership, but also the rank and file supporters. Within these, then, the presumably the stakeholders are more so the first two I mentioned. The activists themselves who actively participate, and the silent majority of people within these social movements, or who are represented by these social movements. Now, from what we've done here, because we don't have time, we're not going to do the final step of going, okay, so what are the arguments, therefore, that stem from this? But along the way, I hope you were coming up with arguments and thinking of arguments that could happen. For instance, I could argue that this leads, that I could argue on which side of the debate do we get more backlash from the leadership of these organizations, when you externally pressure them or when you internally try to reform them. I could argue that that it is better for the silent majority to at least engage rather than totally disengage from these systems and institutions, and that only happens on Gov's side. I could argue that we actually get reform, or that we get a smokescreen of reform, where we give a seal of approval to an institution that's still inherently and functionally harmful. These are all the types of arguments that, to me, come very quickly from what we've identified until now. Let's move on then to talk about the rest of the steps. When we share, we want to share roughly in order of importance. So even though I just write them down in order of how do I think about them, I can reorder them and share them in terms of what matters most, which of these is the biggest impact. The person sharing second should clarify what's new, and so now I'm going to give you a new argument. Here's another new argument, and what's additions to things that are already stated. So I want to add on to what you said about this population, that they're not only an actor, but they're also a stakeholder. We can claim that actually priests really, really suffer when you try to reform their system from within, and you should leave their religion well enough alone. I don't know. Technically, you can. Try to give cases short names so that you can easily refer to them. It's good to call something the smokescreen argument, or the deterrence claim, or the change through positions of authority claim. These are all ways to easily be able to refer to an argument later on. Finally, know that we want to communicate efficiently. It's okay to say, I got it. It's okay to ask, wait a second, why? In order to speed up or slow down your partner as they're sharing. Don't be polite. Don't be polite to your partner in prep. Everywhere else, be nice to your partner. Super important. It's a team game. Sports psychology matters. In prep, that's where you go, got it, move on. Got it, move on. Also, don't be unnecessarily rude. Don't try to resolve things in prep. Prep is 15 minutes where you're trying to come up with as many good ideas as possible. Be nice, or be conflict resolving after the debate. Cool. In terms of prioritization, I already told you we should be thinking, how easy is it for us to prove? How strong is it in the debate? And how does it engage with the rest of the debate? What other cases does it preempt or allow or engage well with from other teams? We always want our last point or last burden to be a nice to have. Panel, I've already proven this argument to you fully. Now let's explain why you're not only justified in doing this, but not only is it beneficial and you're justified in doing this, but you have an obligation to do it. The argument stands even if there's no obligation. I told you I'm solving a problematic problem. I have good outcomes from this, and I'm justified in doing this. I don't have to prove that there's an obligation to do this, but I could, and it's good. Makes the argument stronger. So I should do it, but I should have that last. Whatever I have last is something I should always know in my head. It's okay if I don't have time for it, and I might not have time for it. If DPM plans to do 2 arguments, they should plan to potentially only be running 1 argument. They could end up spending all their time doing rebuilding and rebuttal. So their second argument should be totally a nice to have. Let's talk about an argument that happened in the distant future. Let's talk about an argument that affects a small minority of people. It's good to have it, but it's good to not rely on it. In bottom half, our prioritization is focused on what we think top half is likely to do. Our prioritization becomes more of a prediction, and we structure our priority list accordingly. It should be ordered by what do I want to run if I can run it. Priority number 1 and 2 are stuff that I actually don't think will last. My 1 and 2 priorities are typically the best things to run are the things OG choose to run. So my number 1 and 2 priorities are, no, it's not always true. Sometimes the best CG case is not the best OG case. Let's say the best case in the debate for Gov takes a long time to analyze and to come up with, and is rebuttable and beatable if you have enough time to refute it. That makes it a great CG case, but a bad OG case. Sometimes that exists. Usually the best CG cases are just to run what OG missed. So my 1 and 2 priority are things that I think OG will do. I don't waste time on my number 1 and 2 priority during analysis. I focus on my third, fourth, and fifth priorities. My 1 and 2 priorities, they're just called 1 and 2 to remind me that if this becomes available, I want to run this. It's an if-then pattern. If they do population X, we do population Y. If they do arguments this, we do argument that. Yes, Lena.
I mean, I guess this makes sense. I'm just wondering how this works with vertical extensions, right? Especially in cases where A, you're either not able, like you just cannot come up with multiple arguments, or B, you just know your opening and you believe that you are able to pull off an extension that is
Sure.
the same case. Is it worth discussing the options 1 and 2 more then?
So when we're discussing absolutely it is. When we're talking about verticals, then we want to again be predicting what our top half is going to miss. So it's very easy to analyze an incentive to discriminate. It's very difficult to analyze a capacity to discriminate. It's very easy to analyze that there is sufficient demand and sufficient supply that the black market exists, right? The black market exists for everything. The black market exists for humans. It's difficult to prove that a legalized market is so much better than a black market that it's worth legalizing. To weigh the harms to the few people who are harmed by the black market over the lower harms to a greater proportion of people who are only going to use once you legalize something, right? If I want to tell you this house would legalize heroin. Panel, our opening told you that there's still a supply of heroin and still demand for heroin. Duh. This isn't a complex thing to prove. Every toddler knows this. We all know that there's still demand and still supply. You're not managing to crack down on it. Obviously, the fact that a black market exists is not on its own a sufficient reason to make something legal. The crucial burden is that the harms of the black market outweigh the harms of legalization. Or in other words, that legalizing would improve the conditions for those who consume on either side or those who supply on either side much more than it's going to harm the new consumers or new suppliers who are going to enter in once we legalize it. So we can predict ahead of time in a vertical extension which burdens are going to be easier and which burdens are going to be more difficult to prove. We can predict which burdens the opposition are going to want to engage with more. That is what we should focus on if we want to do verticals. Finally, an analysis. Start by identifying burdens together for the first speaker's speech. Again, burdens are often simple, but you should still coordinate them and identify them together. Remember the cookie cutter burdens. So actor does thing, got to prove incentive and capacity. Black market exists, got to prove there's supply, there's demand, and the harms of the black market are greater than the harms in the legal market to a meaningful extent, and weighing the populations. Those are always going to be my burdens in a black market argument. Secondly, when we're analyzing, we want to work right to left, or sorry, left to right rather than top to down. We want to give every burden a couple of ideas before we start writing them in full. Only once we've written down the names of the ideas, we start elaborating on them. Only once we've elaborated on the simpler reasons do we start adding harder reasons and examples. This is because when you have a burden with nothing written on it, improvising is very hard. When you have the names of the mechanisms, improvising becomes doable. When you have the names and some elaboration on the mechanisms, improvising the full wording of them and the illustrations for them becomes much easier. That is why instead of having a lot of analysis for your first burden and then being stuck in the middle of your second burden and having nothing on your third burden, it's better to first make sure you have a little bit on each burden, and only then make sure you have a moderate amount on each burden, and only then make sure you have a lot on each burden, and only then make sure you have an amazing, foolproof, nothing to add on each burden. That's what I mean by working left to right. Don't be afraid to ask your partner for help. That's what they're there for. Any questions?
I have a quick question. I think just discussing burdens, like fair enough, you do that together anyways. But how do you draw the line? To what extent are you then discussing things that are inside those burdens? As in, like, especially debating with different people, sometimes someone wants to go through every single mech, but someone is just like, oh, fill this burden. Like, how do you find the line of what should be done
So
together?
it's the principle I said at the beginning of debate is actually a game about time. Trying to know every single mech your partner has is typically a more of a compulsive need to relieve your anxiety of not knowing than it's actually efficient and helpful. Instead of going over every mech together, it is better, for example, to just trust the first speaker that they can analyze what they say they can analyze. If something is really difficult, you can ask about a specific burden. Hold on, tell me how you plan to prove this burden because I'm really afraid of how we'll be rebutted there. I think that it's a really nuanced burden. It's okay to say that, but only when you need it, only when you have to know what your partner's analyzing on that burden. Um, if you have lots of spare time, sure, you can just analyze it together, but even then it's going to be better to go, okay, let's split up and think of our own mechs. And then 2 minutes later, get back together, go, okay, what mechs did you think of for this burden? I thought of these two mechs, you thought of those two mechs, great. We now have 4 mechs for this burden. You don't need to know every word that's going to be said by your partner. You just need to know that they're going to have multiple mechs on a burden. Or you can ask the name of the mech without asking how they're going to prove the mech. Saying a name of mech can take three seconds. Explaining the whole explanation for the mech can take half a minute or a minute. Remember, half a minute is 3% of your entire prep time. Like, that's, no, more. How much is it? It's 50 minutes. We have, yeah. It's 3.3% of your entire prep time. That's a lot. You don't want to waste that on nothing. Especially when you consider that it takes time to walk to the room, it takes time to understand the motion, it takes time to come up with ideas, it takes time to share those ideas. The time you have to analyze is not 15 minutes, it's 7 minutes. So suddenly, sharing 30 seconds sharing for a minute how you're going to prove a mech, it takes 12% or it takes like 14% of your entire prep time. That's crazy. It's crazy high. Any more questions? Cool. That's it then for the workshop. In a moment, we're going to share a draw, and I will send you a motion. Oh, Piotr, do they all already see the draw?
I'm getting it now and I'm showing it to them in
Okay.
Discord.
Okay, cool.
Let's see.